Hey, I'm Noam Weissman, and this is Unpacking Israeli History, the podcast that takes a deep dive into some of the most intense, historically fascinating, and often misunderstood events and stories linked to Israeli history. Be in touch at Noam at Unpacked.media. Before we start, as always, check us out on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, everywhere. Just search Unpacking Israeli History and hit the follow or subscribe button. Okay, yalla, let's do this.
אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל. היא מדינת ישראל.
We, the people of Israel, are prepared and anxious to meet the representatives of our neighbors without any preconditions.
There are people in Israel and elsewhere say it's impossible to make peace between the Arabs and Israel or the Jewish people. I think they are wrong.
This isn't going to be your average Unpacking Israeli History episode. About 24 hours ago, at 6:45 p.m. Australian time, two gunmen opened fire on a crowd of some 2,000 Jewish people and non-Jewish people, including many young children, as they celebrated the first night of Hanukkah on Bondi Beach. As of now, 15 people have been killed and many are wounded. At first glance, an anti-Semitic terror attack in Australia might not seem directly connected to Israeli history. In fact, our team discussed this at length. Should I even talk about this here? How does this episode fit with Israeli history? What's the connection between two countries separated by more than 8,000 miles? But if I'm being honest, the connection feels kind of obvious to me. There is a principle in Judaism called, and I'll say it in Hebrew first, Kol Yisrael Arevim Zalazeh. All Jews are connected to each other, are guarantors for each other, that they're responsible for one another. Jewish people, we're a pretty small community. We run like 15 million or so deep, maybe up to 15.7 million. So we're often only a couple of degrees removed from each other. And the feeling that a Jewish person feels for a terror attack against the Jewish community thousands of miles away is a feeling called Peoplehood. We are one people. There's something else too. There are few Jewish communities I've been to who have as deep a connection to the state of Israel than the Jewish communities of Australia. Zionism, core to the Jewish experience in Australia in a very, very unique way. And there's a third reason which connects the story to Israeli history. As much as it feels awful to say, anti-Semitism, the hatred of the Jews, it's a recurring driver of Israeli history. The founding fathers and mothers of the state knew this in their way. Most of them, anyway. Herzl believed that the mere existence of a Jewish state would end anti-Semitism. Zev Jabotinsky, a disciple of Herzl, was a little more pragmatic. He believed that the existence of a Jewish state would protect Jews against anti-Semitism. Both underestimated the power and insidiousness of this hatred. But Jabotinsky was right about one thing. When anti-Semitism spikes, the diaspora shrinks, and the diaspora's loss is Israel's gain. We saw this in 1948 when Holocaust survivors, and also refugees who had been removed from the Arab world, flooded into the Jewish state, more than doubling the population in under 2 years. We saw this with the migration of Soviet Jews, who after years of imprisonment were finally allowed to go free. Over 1 million used that freedom to come to Israel. We saw this when wave after wave of anti-Semitism engulfed French Jews, and they flocked to the Jewish state in droves. And we saw this when tens of thousands of Ethiopians returned to their homeland, to Israel. And I wonder if we're seeing the beginning of another sea change now. I wonder. This event was cataclysmic for the Aussie Jewish community, and cataclysms usually bring sweeping changes. Changes whose consequences we can only guess at now. But one thing I've learned from hosting this podcast for more than a half a decade now, global events that happen far, far away from the embattled strip of land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, end up shaping Israeli history. The Kishinev pogrom in 1903, the Munich Massacre in 1972, the Iranian Revolution in 1979. Jews are connected to each other, and what happens to a Jewish person in Sydney affects a Jewish person in Jerusalem. What happened last night, as I record this tonight, has the potential to change Israel's demographics. All of that is in the future. Much of it is speculation. The event is still fresh, still unfolding, but I needed to talk about it. I needed to address the Australian Jewish community directly. So if you came here for an episode about, say, the history of the kibbutz movement, that'll happen another time, or the Littlehammer debacle, we kind of spoken about that, or I don't know, a brief history of Israeli diplomacy, I won't be offended if you peace out now. Not everyone wants to listen to a history show talk about current events. Sometimes you just want to escape into the headlines of 100 years ago, you know? I do. That's what I love. Sometimes you just want a story with a predictable ending. Sometimes you just want to know it's all going to be okay. This isn't that episode. There is no predictable ending, no definite direction in which the future must unfold. We're all stumbling around in our grief and uncertainty, clutching thin, fragile candles against the gathering dark. The Bondi shooting was the most deadly attack on Jews in the diaspora since 1994, when a Hezbollah suicide bomber drove a van packed with explosives into a Jewish community center in Buenos Aires, murdering 85 people and wounding hundreds more. And in the string of anti-Semitic attacks that have terrorized Jews around the world since October the 7th, this one stands out for its scale, for its apparent planning, for its sheer brutality. It was the first week of summer vacation for Australian kids. The weather was beautiful. People came ready to party. The event, advertised as Hanukkah by the Sea, was hosted by the Chabad of Bondi, and the assistant rabbi, Eli Schlanger, was emceeing from the stage when the gunfire began. For 10 minutes, thousands of terrified people cowered, covering their children and other people's children with their bodies, barely daring to look up. For Jews around the world, the footage evokes the aftermath of the Nova Festival. Prone bodies, desperate EMTs searching for a sign of life, blood, screaming, hysteria. The carnage only stopped when a heroic, unarmed bystander, a 43-year-old Syrian immigrant named Ahmed al-Ahmed, tackled one of the shooters and wrestled away his gun. 10 or 15 minutes of concentrated, full-body terror. And now the painful months or years-long work of healing, of picking up the pieces, of figuring out where to go from here. Australian Jews have been sounding the alarm about the raging tsunami of anti-Semitism they've faced since the 7th of October. The graffiti, the vandalism, the firebombings, the nurses who refused to see Israeli patients, and more. I know this because some of my Australian friends have even asked me to talk about it here on this show, to discuss the straight line from globalize the Intifada to this. In fact, Aussies, Jews and non-Jews, make up a significant chunk of our listeners. We're the #1 Jewish podcast in Australia, and we get emails from our brothers and sisters down under all the time. And when I visited in the summer of 2022, I was moved by the passion and conviction of the Aussie Jewish community. My wife and I spent a beautiful Shabbat in Sydney. And as we strolled along the famous Bondi Promenade, Bondi to Bronte as it's called, we looked at each other and we agreed. This is the most peaceful place we've ever been. We bought books about the Bondi Beach. It's in our living room. There are books about Israel. There are books about the U.S., and we have a book about Bondi. But the idyll of Bondi is shattered forever. It's holy ground now, consecrated with the blood of innocent people whose only crime was being proudly and publicly Jewish. Our enemies have a habit of attacking the Jewish people and the Jewish state on our holidays. Yom Kippur of 1973, of 2019, of 2025, Hanukkah of 2019, Simchat Torah of 2023, and now this, Hanukkah 2025. Just as Simchat Torah will never be the same, just as we can't dance with the Torah without recalling 1,400 of our brothers and sisters stalked, hunted, kidnapped, and murdered, Hanukkah is now changed forever too. Every time we light the first candle, we will do so with 15 ghosts standing behind us. Among them are 2 Chabad rabbis, an 87-year-old Holocaust survivor, a 10-year-old girl. But I'm not here to talk about ghosts. There will be time later to discuss the unexpected and horrifying deluge of anti-Semitism in Australia that predated this attack. But right now, I want to speak directly to our audience, the Unpacking Israeli History community. Not just the Australians, not just the Jews, all of you, anyone who is listening to this. I'm recording this on the second night of Hanukkah, the second night of a holiday dedicated to being a light in the darkness. In the words of the very first Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Mandate Palestine, before the state of Israel was recreated in 1948, Rabbi Abraham Isaac HaKohen Cook, quote, "The purely righteous do not complain of the dark, but increase the light. They do not complain of evil, but increase justice. They do not complain of heresy, but increase faith. They do not complain of ignorance, but increase wisdom." I'm not purely righteous. I'm not one of them. I wish I were, but I'm not. My first reaction to this news was rage, incandescent, blinding fury. But anger, that's not a productive emotion. Not here, not now. Not if you want to dispel the darkness. Not if you want to balance out the evil with good, the ignorance with wisdom, the heresy with faith. Not if you want to consecrate the memory of 15 beautiful souls gunned down in a moment of joy. So I did my best to calm down, to breathe, to remember what our people need right now. And what I think we need is strength, insight, inspiration. A reminder that the smallest light can ward off the greatest darkness. A reminder that we are not alone. We are not alone because we have each other. So I'll tell you 3 stories that you got to hear. 3 amazing stories about 3 different Hanukkah celebrations. Though celebration is not the right word for holidays spent in concentration camps or Hamas tunnels. And I'll finish with an epilogue and an inspiring story of a tiny, mostly non-Jewish community that turned hate into love, really following in the footsteps of Rabbi Kook. Story number 1, Hanukkah in Bergen-Belsen, as told to Yafa Eliach by Rabbi Israel Singer, Aaron Frankel, and Baruch Singer on June 22nd, 1975. This is the story from the Holocaust. Hanukkah came to Bergen-Belsen. A wooden clog, the shoe of one of the inmates, became a Chanukiah. Strings pulled from a concentration camp uniform, a wick, and the black camp shoe polish, pure oil. Not far from the heaps of the bodies, the living skeletons assembled to participate in the kindling of Hanukkah lights. Imagine this during the Holocaust. The rabbi of Blozhov, Rabbi Israel Singer, lit the first light and chanted the first 2 blessings in his pleasant voice, and the festive melody was filled with sorrow and pain. When he was about to recite the 3rd blessing, known as the Shechianu, which in Hebrew is Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Shechianu v'kiyimanu v'hiyanu lazman hazeh. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of all, who has kept us alive, sustained us, and brought us to this season. He stopped, turned his head, and looked around as if he were searching for something. But immediately he turned his face back to the quivering small lights, and in a strong, reassuring, comforting voice, he decided to chant that 3rd blessing. Blessed art thou, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has kept us alive and has preserved us and enabled us to reach this season. He said it. Among the people present at the kindling of the lights was a Mr. Zamachowski, one of the leaders of the Warsaw Bund. He was a clever, sincere person with a passion for discussing matters of religion, faith, and truth. Even here in camp at Bergen-Belsen, his passion for discussion did not abate. He never missed an opportunity to engage in such a conversation. As soon as the Rabbi Blozhov had finished the ceremony of kindling the lights, Zamachowski elbowed his way to the rabbi and said, "You're a clever and honest person. I can understand your need to light Hanukkah candles in these wretched times. I can even understand the historical note of the 2nd blessing, who brought miracles for our fathers in days of old at this season. But the fact that you recited the 3rd blessing is beyond me. How can you thank God and say, 'Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has kept us alive and has preserved us and enabled us to reach this season'? How could you say it when hundreds of dead Jewish bodies are literally lying within the shadows of the Hanukkah lights, when thousands of living Jewish skeletons are walking around in camp and millions more are being massacred? For this, you are thankful to God? For this, you praise the Lord? This you call keeping us alive?" "Zamachowski, you are 100% right," answered the rabbi. "When I reached the 3rd blessing, I also hesitated and asked myself, what should I do with this blessing? I turned my head in order to ask the rabbi of Zaner and other distinguished rabbis who were standing near me if indeed I might recite the blessing. But just as I was turning my head, I noticed that behind me, a throng was standing, a large crowd of living Jews, their faces expressing faith, devotion, and concentration as they were listening to the rite of the kindling of the Hanukkah lights. I said to myself, if God, blessed be he, has such a nation that at times like these, when during the lighting of the Hanukkah lights, they see in front of them the heaps of bodies of their beloved fathers, brothers, and sons, and death is looking from every corner, despite all that, they stand in throngs with devotion, listening to the Hanukkah blessing, who brought miracles for our fathers in days of old. At this season, if indeed I was blessed to see such a people with so much faith and fervor, then I am under a special obligation to recite the 3rd blessing." The story goes, and I saw this on the Chabad website, some years after liberation, the rabbi of Blozhov, now residing in Brooklyn, New York, received regards from Mr. Zamachowski. Zamachowski asked the son of the Skubner Rebbe to tell Israel Spira, the rabbi of Blozhov, that the answer he gave him that dark Hanukkah night in Bergen-Belsen had stayed with him ever since and was a constant source of inspiration during hard and troubled times. That story destroys me. It destroys me because it feels painfully, horribly true. Australia is many hours ahead of South Florida, where I live. It's already tomorrow there. They're living in the future. And do you know what these future dwellers of Australia chose to do one night after the worst anti-Jewish massacre in their country's history? They went back to Bondi Beach, back to the scene of the slaughter. More than 1,000 people crowding together to light the second candle, not shouting slogans of revenge, but singing songs of peace. He who makes peace in the heavens, he will bring peace upon us and upon the entire nation of Israel. Let us say amen. This is the beating heart of Judaism. This is light in the darkness. If anyone there was afraid, they did not show it. 1,000 people gathered to say, the light is not afraid of the dark. That's story number one. Story number two. Earlier this year, the families of Ori Danino, Carmel Gat, Hirsch Goldberg Poland, Alex Lubanov, Almog Sarusi, and Eden Yerushalmi received a message from a man who Rachel Goldberg Poland describes as, quote, the person from the Israeli intelligence services whose job it is to tell us bad news. But this time, his news wasn't bad exactly. What could he tell the families of these 6 beautiful souls that would be worse than the news he delivered in August of 2024? The news that their loved ones had been shot point blank multiple times, their bodies abandoned as the IDF approached. All 6 were returned to Israel to be buried in the soil of their homeland. They have come to be known as the Beautiful 6. What possible news could the hostage liaison give to their family? Surprising news, it turned out. News that seemed to come from beyond the grave. During its sweep of Gaza, the IDF had uncovered more than 3 hours of footage filmed by Hamas as part of their devastating campaign of psychological warfare against Israelis. Among that footage was a clip of the 6 hostages lighting Hanukkah candles in Hamas captivity. You see them lighting candles in the thin, oxygen-poor air, struggling to keep the flames alive. Their drawn faces and Hirsch's missing hand speak to the horrors they had already endured. And still, they said the traditional prayers, sang the traditional songs, looked at each other in solidarity, gave each other hope. 2 years later, we draw the same hope, the same inspiration, the same solidarity from them. 6 beautiful souls who have no idea what impact their brief lives, their memory, has had on Jews around the world. That's story number 2. Hanukkah in a Hamas tunnel. A third and final story. Maybe you've seen this iconic black and white photo from 1931. A Hanukkah perched on a windowsill in Kiel, Germany, proud against a backdrop of Nazi flags. On the back of a photo, a message of hope and defiance. Death to Judah, so the flag says. Judah will live forever, so the light answers. The woman who took that picture, Rebbetzin Rachel Posner, fled Germany with her family in 1934. Her descendants live in Israel. Every year they light their Hanukkah candles using the same Hanukkah that flickered defiantly from their great-grandparents' windowsill in Kiel. The Nazis, they're gone. The Hanukkah still burns, this time kindled by Jewish soldiers of a Jewish army in a Jewish state. Those are 3 powerful stories to me. In times like these, it's tempting to wonder if we will always be alone. Sometimes I feel alone. Sometimes I'm expecting people from the non-Jewish world to be reaching out to me, and I don't hear from them. And already social media is exploding with conspiracy theories that the attack was a false flag, that Mossad was behind it, that Netanyahu's plans were foiled when a Syrian Muslim intervened to take down one of the shooters. I've seen allegations that the shooters were former IDF, and I've seen people blaming the shooting not on the perpetrators, but on Israel. Well, what do they expect when they do a genocide? Seems to be a common theme. I've seen people wringing their hands about what this will do to free speech, how this attack will endanger pro-Palestine activists. These aren't the primary reactions, of course. Plenty of people from across the political spectrum have reacted with the shock and condemnation that this attack deserves, of course. But condemnation, it's not enough. It stops short. It's good to condemn darkness. It's better to spread light. And so I'll leave you with an epilogue and a call to action. Something that you can do regardless of your faith or your background or your community or your traditions. Something that the residents of Billings, Montana took on when anti-Semitism came to their tiny community in 1993. This is an amazing story. Story number 4. Isaac Schnitzer was 5 or 6 years old when he put up a paper menorah in his bedroom window. On Hanukkah, we're commanded to publicize the miracle. That's actually part of the whole story. But Isaac's paper menorah was ripped apart by a cinder block that a neo-Nazi hurled through his window. But then something beautiful happened. Something unexpected. Something that makes me think maybe the Jewish people are not always alone. Maybe we have friends. Maybe we have allies. Over the remaining days of Hanukkah, the residents of Billings, Montana took to the streets holding light-up Chanukkiot. There are very few Jews in Montana, and most of the people out in the streets were not Jewish. The Sunday school teacher at the local church was absolutely not Jewish, but she decided that come Sunday, she would stand up to hatred. Her pastor was all in. They had their students at the church draw Chanukkiot, and that night, they all decorated their own windows with their drawings, including the teacher. The teacher had young kids, and she was wary of putting a target on her own home. But her love was stronger than her fear. The editor of the local paper, the Billings Gazette, was probably not Jewish. I don't know. But he or she nonetheless made the choice to print a full-page menorah that residents could tape to their door or window to show solidarity. Soon, more Chanukkiot appeared in the windows of Billings, Montana, and then more, until 10,000 homes across Billings had adorned their windows with the newsprint Chanukkiah, sending a clear message to the neo-Nazis that had terrorized their neighborhood with hateful flyers, with slurs, with death threats, with a cinder block through a child's window. The little town of Billings, Montana refused to be cowed, refused to bow to hatred. And they made the most beautiful, worthy choice a person can make, the choice to stand in solidarity. So I'm going to end this episode of Unpacking Israeli History with a plea to my whole community, Jewish, non-Jewish. It's a call to action, whether you're Jewish or non-Jewish. Light a Hanukkah candle tonight. In fact, light one every night of Hanukkah. It doesn't have to be all 8. It doesn't even have to be in a menorah. And here's the most important point. It really, absolutely doesn't matter if you're Jewish or not. If you have a picture, send it my way. Light one candle. I think you know the email by now. Noam at unpacked.media. That tiny flickering flame in your window, it's a revolution. That tiny flickering flame is the difference between darkness and light. Now more than ever, be the light. Happy holidays, Hanukkah Sameach, and may we know no more sorrow. Unpacking Israeli History is a production of Unpacked and Open Door Media brand. This episode was produced by Rivki Stern. Our team for this episode includes Adi Elbaz and Rob Pera. I'm your host, Noam Weissman. See you next week.